Thank you, Erica, for facilitating this morning, and good morning, everyone. I hope everybody's having a great day. Um, uh, Let me pull up my slide deck here. Those were some interesting questions that we posed there, and it showed that there's some expertise here from a SQL data warehousing perspective. So we may be talking about some topics that you may already know about or you may already utilize within your environment. That's okay. I hope you sit here. Maybe you can learn something new. I always find that I learn something new from every topic I sit in. We also had a good differentiation there between the intermediate and the beginner level. So this is really set to be a primer to the SQL Data Warehouse. We're not going to talk about massive parallel processing or what the SQL Data Warehouse is today. We're going to cover some of the topics with respect to scaling, backups, and high-level monitoring of our environment. When we leave here today, we're not going to be experts with the SQL Data Warehouse, but we're going to have a good primer to get going. I find even myself that new things are being released on a weekly, monthly basis to the SQL Data Warehouse and Azure. So you really need to keep up with the roadmap online when utilizing some of these Azure technologies. So my name's Daniel Taylor. I've worked for several large companies before I came to become a consultant at Pragmatic Works. I'm
Hey,
currently a
Dan,
senior, yes,
just cutting in here. Are we supposed to see your slide deck?
we are we not?
No, I just see like the backsplash of looks like your desktop background.
All right, that is interesting. Okay, so
There we
now
go.
you should see it. Okay,
Yep,
that's
I see it.
interesting.
Perfect.
Switched and switched again. All right, technology. How is Dan keeping up with all the automation? Apparently not understanding his laptop. Apologize for that, everyone. And once again, good morning. So this is kind of my beginning slide deck that I was talking about there, the primer to scaling backups and monitoring that nobody was seeing out there in webinar land. So I apologize for that. My name's Daniel Taylor. There's some of my career information there. I'm currently a senior consultant with Pragmatic Works. I've been here a little over 2 years. It's going to be 2.5 years before I know it. And there's some of my credentials, and I blog occasionally at wordpress.dbabulldog.com. I'm going to be blogging more about SQL data warehousing technologies, and I'm going to have some questions here at the end, or at least one question of some things that some of you out there might like to see from a webinar as well as a blogging perspective. So let's get into it. So today is intended for those starting out. We will be covering some intermediate techniques. So some of those who are familiar with SQL data warehousing and are just using the portal, say for example, we'll be going over some PowerShell techniques that will help you out, I believe, in maintaining your SQL data warehouse environment. It's a relaxed session. I try and keep them relaxed. I don't like to get too stressed out. We get stressed out enough as it is. And this deck came out of a lot of client site questions that I've been receiving out there recently. Been on a 3 or 4 SQL data warehousing projects from implementation to training, and we had some really good questions, some things that I even learned while I was out there, and I wanted to share those with you today. My mouse is really going fast for me today. It's out of control. So during our time together, we're going to talk about these 3 high-level topics. We're going to talk about starting, pausing, and scaling our data warehouse environment, which you're going to hear me talk a lot about. I really enjoy the that Microsoft has separated our storage from our processing, so we can easily start, stop, and scale our environment. It's a really solid data warehousing environment. We're going to talk about backups, and I have a question mark there, and we're going to talk about our recoveries. The reason I have a question mark there is we're going to go into that in a little bit of a slide, but what can we do from a backups perspective when we talk about our SQL Data Warehouse? And we're going to start you with a primer for monitoring your SQL Data Warehouse. I sat in a Microsoft session with a really smart group of individuals, and they shared with me this chart that when you see it, you're going to go, oh, cool. And to me, I was like, it's a really simple chart, but it does a lot for you. It's a great flow chart in troubleshooting and monitoring your SQL Data Warehouse. So we'll go over that as well. And I wanted to share that with you. If you've been in any of my Azure type webinars or that, I like talking about connecting with Azure. Today we're going to use both the portal and we're going to utilize PowerShell. Inside this slide deck, there is information about the different RM modules that are required for PowerShell. We're not going to get into that in this session. However, just so that you know, the information on how to make sure that your PowerShell is up and ready to go is included within this deck. And we're going to use both the portal and the PowerShell to look at some of our demos today. So let's talk about starting, pausing, and scaling. The SQL Data Warehouse is a phenomenal system when it comes to being able to start, pause, and increase our scale of our unit. We have three ways that we can do this within our work environment. We can use our graphical interfaces, which we'll look at. We have our non-graphical interfaces, such as Azure PowerShell commandlets or REST API. Up until recently, I hadn't seen anybody use REST API to manage their SQL Data Warehouse. I just put it in here because it's one of those administration tools that we can utilize or have in our belt. We're not going to go over this in this slide deck. I just wanted to point out that it's there. And I saw them doing some really, really cool things with respect to REST API. So when we talk about the SQL Data Warehouse, we need to talk about our workload management. And you've heard me mention it several times. You've heard me talk about pause, resume, scale, and something I haven't mentioned yet is resource classes. So why would you pause your SQL Data Warehouse? Well, number one, it's going to save on cost, and you can bring it up for on-demand resources. One of the primary reasons I pause a SQL Data Warehouse or recommend people pause their SQL Data Warehouse is we have dev and staging environments. We don't necessarily need those up during the evenings or during, our non-work environments. And because it's so easy to spin up or spin down, I always recommend that you put in some sort of mechanism at night to take your SQL Data Warehouse and just pause it, stop the spend. You won't get any data warehousing unit cost. You will get the storage cost, but you'll be saving on data warehousing unit cost. And one of the primary reasons I see companies go away from Azure is because of spend. So if we can reduce spend, that's a good thing. We can resume. At any point, we can give people the ability, we can give our ops folks, we can give our dev team folks, we could give them that access through role-based access control, the ability to go and resume the SQL Data Warehouse when they want to, or also as good stewards, they can shut it down, but we can acquire that compute in memory at any point in time we don't want it. So if you're anything like myself, Sunday afternoon, you get an idea in your head and you want to go off and try some sort of weird, crazy idea, you can go in and you can resume your SQL Data Warehouse relatively easy. And we'll take a look at that in our demo. Another feature I love about SQL Data Warehousing is how easy it is. We can provision extra DWUs. So let's say we know that we have a load process that runs at 2 or 3 in the morning and it needs X amount of resources. We can easily spin up our data warehousing units to accommodate that, and then we can spin those down. We'll talk about something here when we look at that in the demo, but we can easily scale up or scale down. And then also within our SQL data warehouse, from a workload management, from a primer perspective, it's good to know about our resource classes. So we have our dynamic and we have our static resource classes, and you can see there that we have several different dynamic resource classes, and we have several static resource classes that we can add user IDs or logins to. For example, you have your small, medium, and extra large RC. I very rarely see people use extra large resource class. I see a lot of folks use, and it's a recommendation when you're loading your data, when you create your account, to add it to the large RC role. Some important things to note here about your dynamic and static resource classes, however, is that your dynamic resource class is always going to take precedent over static resource classes. So if you have a dynamic resource class, and if you have a login, let's say, and it's part of a dynamic resource class and it's a large RC, but you put in the smaller static RC down below, it's always going to take that dynamic resource class. Also within a resource class, say for example, if I have a login, let's say Dan's Crazy Loader login, and it's in both the extra large RC and it's in the medium RC, by design, SQL Data Warehouse is going to give me the resources I need for the extra large RC. So that's something to note. So it's something you want to keep track of when you're adding folks to roles, to make sure that you don't accidentally put them in a role, a resource class that that you don't want them in. Say, for example, you only want to give them medium resource class, but somebody accidentally put them in the extra large resource class. That could be a problem, especially if it's a query that does a lot of aggregations and requires a lot of resources. It could consume all your resources for your SQL Data Warehouse. We have several choices when we want to scale up and scale down, and you heard me talk about that we can scale up and scale down our data warehouse. You can scale up and it's going to cost you more money, and you can scale down and it's going to cost you less money. We have 3 ways to do that. We can do it through the portal, we could do it through PowerShell, or we could do it through T-SQL. Now, I made a special note down there below. We don't have any T-SQL statements available to us to suspend or resume when we're doing that. You need to either use PowerShell or the portal to suspend or resume your SQL Data Warehouse, and that's also known as pausing and starting your data warehouse. So let's pop over and let's look at a demo of starting and scaling here. All right, so let's log into our portal. And here I have I already have a resource class. I have my SQL DW engagement suspending billing resource ARM, my ARM template here, or my Azure Resource Management. I have a set of things, I apologize, a set of deployments that I've done here. You can see I have an automation account, my runbook, and so on. The Azure items that we're going to be interested in here, the artifacts, is the SQL Server and the SQL Data Warehouse. So let's click over here onto this SQL Data Warehouse real quick. You can see here that currently it's in a pause state. And the reason we know it's in a pause state is because we can see here that we have the ability to start it. If we wanted to start this, we could click on it here and it would start our data warehouse through our portal. So when you're first getting started within SQL Data Warehousing, it's okay. I still use this all the time as well. However, if we wanted to, we could go over here and we could log in. Now I'm opening up in Visual Studio Code over here. I have a PowerShell script that's all set up and ready to go, but essentially what this is doing is it's logging into my Azure RM account. It's getting my subscription. I'm going to set my subscription here. I already know what my subscription is that I'm going to utilize. The reason I show the Get Azure RM subscription is in case you need to find the proper subscription in case you're assigned to multiple subscriptions within your for your Azure login. And then we're going to resume our SQL Data Warehouse real quick here. So first thing, let's log into our SQL Data Warehouse. We're going to run this selection. And just so you know that I'm not doing any magic, I need to log into my Azure account. And you have to actually type in your login correctly for it to work. So what's going to happen is we're going to log into our account. Now you can see here that I have logged into my Azure account through PowerShell. I'm going to get my Azure RM subscription. I'm going to just show that here. Even though I already know it, I just want to show it. I'm going to run this selection. You can see here I'm part of two subscriptions for this particular login. The one I'm interested in is our sandbox here. I don't want to go to our PW Corp one here, so I'm going to select my Azure subscription so I'm in the correct place. And you can see here that I have switched to the proper Azure account. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to resume my SQL Data Warehouse. So here you can see I'm using the resume-Azure RM SQL database. I've defined the resource group name, the server name, and the database name. All these scripts will be made available to you at the end of the session. I have a little cleanup to do at the end. I just want to strip out some of this information, but these will all be made available to you at the end. I'm going to run this selection. So now what's happening behind the scenes is it's starting up our SQL Data Warehouse. So let's pop back over here to our, excuse me, let me shut something down. I apologize. So that doesn't get in the way like it just did. All right, if we pop back over to our Azure portal here, we can go over to our resource group, and we can go over here and we can look real quick at deployments. And it's not going to show there. So real quick, let's go back to our data warehouse, and we can see here that it's the, this is where I meant to go, that you can see here now our start button is no longer a dark icon, it's grayed out. This means that it is in the process of starting. So once it's started, we can resume our resources, and we can go back in and we can say, okay, do we want to scale up or do we want to scale down? But at this point, it's spinning up our data warehouse. So while it's doing that, let's go over here real quick. And what we're going to look at next is, you can see here that I'm doing this through PowerShell. We showed that you could do it through the portal. We showed that you can resume your resources through PowerShell. Now let's say we wanted to scale, and we got to wait for our data warehouse to come online. It looks like it's online, but if we wanted to scale our data warehouse, right now my data warehouse is set to a DWU of 400 or 200, and we would want to set it to a DWU of 400, let's say, for increasing the loads. Now, this is going to incur more cost, but we need it to be able to do our load processes. So we could scale up our data warehousing units in that way. We could also scale those up inside here through our portal as well. So let's first take a look at the portal. Here you can see now that what used to be the start button is the pause button. If we were to hit this, we would essentially stop or pause our SQL Data Warehouse. If we go down here, we can see we have a little scale icon inside our blade. This is going to show us our DW usage as well. Down here in the lower left-hand corner, you're going to see here that we have a way that we can scale our DW use. So you can either drag up or drag down. You can scale up, scale down your data warehousing unit from there, or you can do it through PowerShell as well. So let's do that real quick. Let's scale our data warehouse through the use of PowerShell rather than through the portal. So here you can see I'm setting my Azure RM SQL database. I'm giving it the resource group name. I'm telling it, you know, the database name I want to scale, the server name. This is a logical server name, and we'll go over here. That we'll talk about that here in a second. And my request service objective name, and we're going to set it to a DW400. So let's run this PowerShell commandlet. So you can see here it's running. We have the process running. If we go back to our portal real quick and we look at and we hit refresh here, and we go back to scale, you're going to see that our slider is disabled, and that's because we're scaling at this point. So what we're doing is we're saying, all right, we can't access our data warehouse at this time because we're increasing our data warehousing units. Let's go back over to Visual Studio Code real quick. Another way we could do this is if we wanted to, we could also do this through a T-SQL statement. So if we wanted to scale our data warehouse, we could do it through here. We could do an alter database, modify our service objective, and here you can see I'm scaling down from a 400 to a 200. So here we could scale up or scale down as well. So we have multiple ways to scale up, scale down, and start and stop our SQL Data Warehouse. At the end of the session, what we're going to do is we're going to look back at our PowerShell script at the end of our session, because what I want to show is when at the end of the day, I know I don't want to keep this data warehouse up and running. So what we're going to do is we're going to shut down our data warehouse, and we're going to do that by doing a suspend-Azure RM SQL database. So those are the three ways we can easily scale up, scale down, start and stop our data warehouse from a primer perspective. So let's go back over to our slide deck here. Something also good to mention about scaling up and scaling down. When we scale up or we scale down a data warehousing unit is essentially taking our data warehouse offline during that period of time that's doing that. So it's flushing all transactions within the transaction log, making sure anything that's been checkpointed gets written to disk, and anything that's in flight will get rolled back. So that's important to know. So if you're going to scale up or scale down your data warehouse, it is an offline operation while you're doing that. It can be relatively quick as long as you make sure that there's not a lot of information within your transaction log, a minute to two. But if you have a long-running transaction that needs to be committed, it can take a long time to scale up or scale down or shut down your data warehouse. So let's talk about backup and recovery with respect to our SQL Data Warehouse. Within our SQL Data Warehouse, so from a backup perspective, you know, our goal with any backup and recovery is to be able to provide business continuity. You know, we want to be able to provide the business to keep it up and running. We want to be able to provide disaster recovery. Recent events have shown that we need to have disaster recovery in place. We can have local and geographical backups for our data warehouse. So we can have a data warehouse here, let's say, for example, in the Southeast, and then we can have a geographical backup in its pairing that it chooses. Then we can have our Azure Blob Storage snapshots, which we'll talk about. So the data warehouse does snapshots for us. We can restore to our primary region, and we can also restore to a different geographical region if we so chose to when it comes to our SQL Data Warehouse. So we have backups. We have a local and geographical backup. This includes Azure Blob Storage backups and our geo-redundant backups. We can restore to a point in time in our primary region, and we can recover to a different geographical region. Now, when I say we can recover to a point in time in our primary region, it's not like we're used to today from our normal SQL Server databases. A SQL Data Warehouse will back up your database essentially every 24 hours. Every 24 hours, you're going to get a full backup of your data warehouse. After approximately every 8 hours, and I threw it here on the slide, approximately every 8 hours, you're going to get a snapshot of your backup, a snapshot of your SQL Data Warehouse. Now, that's kind of hard from a DBA perspective, from my perspective, from anybody's perspective, to kind of understand at first. But we have no way currently within our SQL Data Warehouse world to take manual backups or manual snapshots of our SQL Data Warehouse. So just keep that in mind when you're deploying out to your SQL Data Warehouse. It's not a bad thing. It's just something we need to put into our plan, and we need to be able to take that into account if we need to replay data. So once every 24 hours, we get a full backup, and every 8 hours, we get up to about every 8 hours, we get a snapshot of our database. We have data redundancy because it's on premium storage, so we have the same local redundant storage because we are on Azure Premium Storage, so we have 3 snapshots underneath that protects our data in case of an infrastructure failure, say, for example, or a disk drive fails or something like that. We have our Azure Blob snapshots. We have many files located within there. We're going to get one of those for every 8 hours, and those are available for 7 days. That's also something important to point out. Right now, within the SQL Data Warehouse realm, our backups are only maintained, our full backups and our snapshots are only maintained for every 7 days. So Microsoft recommends if you have to keep backups longer than 7 days, that every 7th day you restore to a copy of your database, you restore a copy of your SQL Data Warehouse somewhere, and you maintain it and allow that to back up. And then after the 7th day, you delete it and then restore the other one. So it's also something else to keep in mind. That could change. Always keep up to date with respect to changes within the Azure world. I'm hoping at some point they implement like we could do with SQL databases, where we could do long-term redundancy, long-term storage of our database backups, but right now that's not available to us. We have our data redundancy. We talked about this on our previous slide a little bit. We have our Azure Premium Storage, which is really fast, really quick, makes it highly available, and it's able to survive infrastructure issues. We have our local redundant Azure Premium Storage. We have transparent data encryption on that premium storage. So that means essentially locally we have 3 copies of our data. We can't access those 3 copies, but it provides us from any sort of failures within the Azure Data Center. And then we have our geographic backups. We have geo-redundant storage accounts that have read access in a paired data center. And I provided a link at the bottom in the notes in this slide deck. We don't get to choose our paired data center. That's chosen for us, and inside that link it tells you if you choose this particular data center, this is going to be your paired data center. Now, interestingly enough, you can use that geographic redundant backup to restore from, and we'll look at that in our demo. So we can restore our SQL Data Warehouse, and we can do it in multiple ways. We can restore it through the portal, which I'll do, but we can also restore it through PowerShell scripts. we can recover from our geo-redundant. So I always recommend, especially for a production database, that you have your geo-redundant enabled. That way you can restore if there is any failures or you lose your local database. We can choose a restore point to back to the point. We can choose a restore point to the last snapshot, and we'll look at that inside the demo. You'll see where I have particular snapshots of my SQL Data Warehouse that's been taken. When we do this, we need to make sure we calculate our restore cost, and we verify our DTU capacity on our local on our logical server. We just want to make sure that we look at the capacity on our logical server to make sure we haven't maxed it out by putting too many SQL Data Warehouses on top of it. Also, we want to calculate our restore cost because if it's a 4 terabyte database, there's going to be cost to restoring that. There's going to be cost to having that in place. So we want to be able to calculate that. And it's just something to keep in mind. It's just something I like to point out. We have multiple ways we can restore our SQL Data Warehouse. We can use the Azure portal, which I do use. We have our PowerShell commandlets, which I will use as well. It provides us with a little more flexibility. Let's say we could throw that into an application, and you can also use REST API. So let's pop over and let's look at a demo real quick of our backup and recovery. All right. So let's head back to our portal first. So we can see here, we're going to go back to our resource group. And we're going to go back to our resource group over here. You can see here we have our data warehouse. We have our logical server and we have our data warehouse. I know just from setting this up that this server right here is the logical server that our SQL Data Warehouse is sitting on top of. And how can I tell that? We could go in here and we could look real quick and we could see here that, you know, we have these databases on top of our logical server with a data warehousing unit of 400. And let's click on our data warehouse. So you can see here, we're back in the data warehouse that we started at the beginning of this session, and we scaled up, and now we can see here that our scale is at DW400. It's been brought back online and it's available for us to use. Now we have several options here. We talked about we could do our restore through the portal or we could do our restore through PowerShell. Here we're going to look at real quick at doing a restore through, we're not going to do it, we're going to use PowerShell to do the actual recovery, but here you could see if we clicked on restore, it gives us the database, and when you do a restore, you have to do it as a different database name. You can't restore over top of your current SQL Data Warehouse, just like the SQL DB. And then you can see here that we have a set of restore points that are available, and there's only one, we have 2 days, but we have 2 days that we can recover to. That's our full, and then we have here our snapshots. So you can see here that my snapshots were taken at approximately, that would be about 7 o'clock our time because it's in UTC time. And then 15:31. So you can see here that we have approximately 2 snapshots for our full backups. When we pause our SQL Data Warehouse, no backups and no snapshots will be taken. Now let's say we paused, and I'm going to X out of this and we'll go over to PowerShell. Now let's say I took my database offline on Friday, and I had a snapshot taken. The Azure environment took a snapshot of it. I paused that to go home on the weekend. Saturday and Sunday, there will be no snapshots or backups of my data warehouse. When I come in on Monday, that Friday backup is 2 days old. So keep that in mind. You only have 7 days to be able to recover from that particular point in time. After 7 days, it automatically archives or purges off. So if you go on an extended vacation and you pause your data warehouse, remember, you're not going to have any backups out there if you come back after, let's say, 9 days. Real nice vacation. So let's go over to PowerShell real quick. Sorry, Visual Studio Code. You can see here, and these are the scripts that you're going to get. I have a recovery folder here, and we're going to close my scale, pause, and resume. And we're going to recover from a snapshot. So we're going to double click on this. And at the top here, Control B. All right, at the top here, I'm going to get a list. So I have my subscription name, my resource group name, my server name as a variables, database name, and new database name. And then I'm going to use the Get Azure RM SQL Database restore points. This is going to give me a list of all the restore points available to me so that later down here, when I do a restore from my original database to my copy database, I can put a point in time here recovery in. So let's go ahead and run this. We're going to run this selection. And I should have a login screen somewhere. Nope, it ran. It was already logged in. Okay, good, good, good. All right, so easy peasy. All right, so here you can see it gave me a list of all the restore points that were available. And if you remember, in the drop down, we saw those snapshots that were taken. Something to point out that the snapshots are in UTC. These here are in our local time. So you got to do a little math there when you take a look at them. So for our recovery perspective, we're going to pull this restore point creation date. We're going to pull this 8/29/2017 3:31:01 p.m. and we're going to put that into our point in time. Now this is going to recover us to that particular snapshot, and what it's going to do is it's going to recover database DWD to DWD underscore copy. I just chose a random name when I created my data warehouse here. So it's going to restore it as that using the restore database parameter here, calling the restore Azure RM SQL database. So let's select this. And we're going to run this selection. I should get a login prompt. Here's my login prompt. And you could, gotta know the name of my own company. You could use KeyPass or some sort of key management vault to be able to call these passwords inside your PowerShell script. You could also put the parameters in there and hard code those passwords. I don't recommend that. So you could do that there. So here you can see we started. It went through and it pulled our correct subscription name, and you can see here, that I don't have a valid restore point. Well, that's wonderful, folks. Let me see if we can restore back to the other point. What is happening here, and I can explain this away, is that I don't have, since my database, I deleted my database last night and then recovered it. I may not have enough restore points to get this database to, so I may have to do a blog post about this afterwards. Let's see if we can get this to run using this selection here. right, and do we have big money, big money, big money? All right, great. So it looks like that snapshot is going to work for us. So what we can do while this is taking place is we could monitor the state of our recovery. So let's do that. So I have over here some syntax that we can look at. So we could look at our select DM operation status, where resource type equals database. We're going to open up here Visual Studio 2017 so that we can look at this. So I'm going to open in Visual Studio. All right, so this will provide us the way to look at this while my PowerShell script is still running. Let's make sure that's still happening. So you can see here that we're still restoring to our logical server. Is Visual Studio, it takes a little while for it to connect. I'm sitting on the East Coast and my SQL Data Warehouse is on the West Coast in this particular case. And I did that just to show, there is a little latency between the two. So when you're planning out your SQL Data Warehouse environment, you want to try and get it as close to you or as close to your clients as possible. Because there will be some slight latency between the two environments. All right, we're gonna go to our logical server. We're gonna open up our databases. Here you can see that we have this particular database. I'm more interested. I'm gonna log in my query. I'm gonna do against the master database of my logical server for this one. I'm gonna do new query. I'm just gonna run this select star from, let me give some more room here, from DM operation status. Let's run this. And you can see here that I've done a bunch of different deletes, restores, alters, but you can see here from a recovery perspective that the database that we just identified that we said we were going to copy is coming in. We have a database underscore copy, database restore, and is in progress. Now, something to note about the percent complete, I opened an item up on that. That's not 100% accurate. It doesn't keep a real good running status of the recovery, how far it is in its recovery, but that's just something to point out. But this is one way we can track the recovery of our database. Now within the scripts, I also provided, and we're not going to walk through them today, I provided a script on how to recover from a geographical location. You can see here that the difference being is that we have, you call this parameter from geo backup, and this is where you would define the parameter information to pull from your geographical backup. The scripts are in there as well. And this one I'm working on here. So this is interesting, and I want to point this out. There's two documents here that say I can restore from a deleted backup within my SQL data warehouse logical server. So let's say, for example, I accidentally deleted my SQL data warehouse here. Let's say I accidentally deleted this particular database here. The document, there's two variations of the document. One says I'm able to recover it. The other says that you have to contact Microsoft. When I try and do a restore from my logical server, which is here, so if we went to our logical server and we went down here to deleted databases, you can see here the databases that I've deleted, and all these are data warehouses because I was trying to test this script. Right now, I'm unable to get it to work. I have a request out to Microsoft to see which of the documents is correct. But at this point in time, if you had to recover a database back from a deleted one, you got to make sure you have your geo redundant backup, because it does not look like you can recover from a deleted database at this point in time for a SQL data warehouse. You can see here that we're still going and our database is still recovering. So as the database is still recovering, let's go back to our slide deck. And let's look at Azure SQL Data Warehouse Monitoring. And once again, this is just a primer, and this wasn't meant to be an eye chart, and it's easier to read on your desktop, I promise you that. But this right here, what I wanted to show is this is our data warehousing units, and this is what we get from a workload perspective when we spin up a particular DWU. Not all the facets are there that you have, you know, the different static resource classes, the dynamic resource classes, those aren't all here. This is just a real high level of what you get when you have a particular data warehousing unit. I did put the regular dynamic resource classes there, but you can show how many concurrency slots you get, the amount of meg you get per distribution, and how much memory you get system-wide for each data warehouse you spin up with a particular DWU. And also I made a note down here that, you know, TempDB is allocated 399 gigabit per DW100. So from a monitoring perspective, we don't have as much control as we would like to have, like we do in our current SQL Data Warehouse on-prem. If we had a SQL Server 2017 or a SQL Server 2016 and we're our data warehouse on-prem, you know, we're used to monitoring I/O, memory consumption, you know, a lot of perfmon stats and extended events. However, we do have some things that we still do need to monitor from a SQL data warehousing perspective. It's good to monitor our connections. We can monitor our query executions. We can monitor waiting queries. We can monitor our TempDB. We can monitor our memory. And we can monitor our transaction log. And that's these are all items that I still recommend you monitor within your SQL data warehouse. So I talked about that cool chart that Microsoft, the guys at Microsoft, one of their smart teams showed me. And this is a cool flow chart for when you're trying to troubleshoot performance issues within your SQL data warehouse. So if you know that you want to monitor, or somebody says something's running slow within your SQL data warehouse, you can walk through this flow chart. So the first place we recommend you look at is you look at your PDW exec sessions, and then from there, you can identify your PDW exec requests. So you look at your sessions. Do we have too many sessions going on? If no, then, or even yes, then let's look at our PDW exec requests. When we look at our PDW exec requests, we can look at a couple things. We can see that either things are moving along, or we can see that items are stalled. So you could go through, and if you see things are stalled, then we may want to go here and we may want to look at, for example, our PDW waits. We may want to see, are we waiting for a table lock, an index lock? What are we waiting for behind the scenes? If we're not quite seeing any kind of locks, then our next step would be to look at our query plan steps. Each QID has a whole set of query plan steps. So you have one main query, and then you have a bunch of steps within that query. On those steps, then we would want to look and see, is one particular step running for a long time, one step ID? If one step ID is running for a particular long time, then we may want to look at things like PDW DMS workers. We may want to look and see if we have data movement. Are we getting broadcast movement? Are we getting partition movement? Are we getting shuffle movement? And movement is outside of the scope here because that's a whole session in itself. And I'd like to hear back from you, or if Erica could hear back from you, some of the other things that you'd like to see from a data warehousing perspective, that would be great. Because we have a lot of information. We have members on our team that are willing to share additional information on MPP technologies and how to dig deeper into them. And then if we want to dig even deeper, we can look at our request step, and each request step is going to have a set of SQL or a SQL statement associated with it. So that's the flow, and then you work yourself from the top down again. So that's a great way to troubleshoot your SQL data warehouse. So let's take a look at that real quick. All right, let's open up Visual Studio Code. And we are going to pull. So here I have monitoring, and we're going to do an end-to-end monitoring. So I am going to copy all of this over here into my Visual Studio. And all right. So let's get rid of this size so we can get some real estate. So we're inside. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to switch to our database here, our DWD0 GQ database. And we're going to look at a couple things here. So from our chart, the first thing we recommended is you look at your, let me kick something off here. What I'm doing behind the scenes here is I have this set of exercises that go against my data warehouse, and I run this. It was provided to me by one of the guys at Microsoft, and you put this together. It's a great little exercise, and I'm just going to run this behind the scenes here to put some workload on my data warehouse. All right. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at our exec sessions. So we're going to run here. The first thing we said is, there we go. So you can see here I have only one session, and that's the session that I just kicked off, and you can see it's running under small user RC. Not really showing me anything there. So what my next step would be is, let's look at my active queries within my data warehouse. Here you can see I have an active query. One thing to note, we're going to pull this QID here. We're going to pull this QID 4741. We're going to need this to dig a little deeper. So we looked at our DM requests. We can see here that we just have a slow query and it's not running very fast. We could also look at our top 10 longest run queries. We know we don't have a lot. So at this point, I just wanted to provide that there. But at this point, we know we don't have that. You can also look at queries if you want to look at them. If you label them, you could say pull my query based on the label. So here you can see that I have a label called my query. That's another way to pull information from your exec request. And I always recommend using this option label here when you're writing queries. It really helps with troubleshooting. And then here, our next step would be to look at our weights. So we said, okay, if we have something running, let's look at our possible weights. Is it waiting on anything within our database? So here we could run our request, and I recommend that you go through this demo on your own SQL Data Warehouse. Put a workload on it and run these queries and see what they return. But you could see here that we have no weights going on for this particular QID, so we can move forward. And we can see here that we have our request steps. And we're going to pull this. Now, this is going to be each step that ran for this QID, and it should have multiple steps. So you can see here that my query that I ran had a bunch of steps behind the scenes, and it had its operation types. For these particular operation types, I would look for things like broadcast move, partition move, shuffle moves, anything that's running a long period of time. So you look at this elapsed time column over here and try and look for things that are running long. And then if we wanted to, we could look at our DMS workers, but we have nothing running at this time, but let's just see what that would look like. All right, and you can see here that for this particular QID, it was running all of these statements behind the scenes. And just from knowing what it's doing, what I was doing is I was loading data from an external table in this case. Other things I mentioned that you can monitor, and I have the scripts here for you to monitor, but you would want to look at memory consumption. You would want to, and I have some notes in here that if your memory consumption is, if you're utilizing too much of your memory consumption, you may want to spin up your DWUs. I also have a script in here to look at the tempDB. If your tempDB usage is getting close to that 399 gig per DWU that you're given, I recommend that you you spin up additional DWUs if needed. However, you want to check for skew of your data in that. You also want to check to make sure your cluster column store indexes and row groups are in a healthy state. Another query I included in here for you that you may want to look at is log usage. You have transaction logs behind the scenes. You can't you don't maintain those like we do today. It does it for us. However, if one of our log files is reaching near 160 gigabytes, we recommend that you consider scaling up or looking at if you have poor row groups or if you have skew within your data. And if you have any questions with respect to these scripts when you run them in your environment, please reach out to me. I'm always happy to help and provide additional guidance and insight into those. And that is it. So we have a couple minutes. If folks had some time and they wanted to ask some questions, now is the time to do that, Erica.
Hey Dan, it is actually noon already, so I don't know if you want to take a question or should I just go ahead and wrap up? I can send you those questions if you want to follow up with a blog or something like that. Up to you.
I apologize, y'all. I have 11:55 on my clock on my computer. I am so sorry that I ran over like that. I am able to take, if some people want to ask a couple questions here, if you had a couple minutes, Erica, that's great. If people want to.
Right, let me go ahead and answer some questions here, or ask you some of the questions. Does Pragmatic Works only focus on Azure? Do you also have webinars discussing similar data warehouse technologies on other cloud providers?
I know we don't have any webinars. I know we've been looking at other things, but our primary focus right now, we're solution agnostic. We try and go into an environment and look at solutions. I know we've looked at other items like Snowflake. I like Snowflake, but I prefer SQL Data Warehouse, just for the flexibility and the support I get. It's not that Snowflake is a bad technology, say for example, it's just I enjoy the support we get from Azure and the Microsoft SQL Data Warehouse.
Right. Another question here, can we create primary key in Data Warehouse?
Okay, so who asked that question? Because that's a great question. One, I'm still banging my head against the wall. You cannot create primary keys right now. With primary key and foreign keys are still not supported within the SQL Data Warehouse. I'm hoping that they add that to it for us, but right now we do not have the support for primary keys and foreign keys within the SQL Data Warehouse.
Okay, while doing the scale down, is there any data loss or downtime?
No data, well, great question. So if your transactions have been committed, just like in any other database platform, those transactions will be written to our storage, our premium storage. However, if those transactions are in flight and they haven't been checkpointed, and you scale down, those transactions will be rolled back. So yes, there is the possibility in that case for data loss. And yes, when we scale up and scale down, it is considered an offline operation at this point in time.
Okay, and looks like we don't really have any more questions coming in, so
Okay.
I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up. Actually, we have some coming in now. I don't have access to the cloud or any backups, even though, oh, that's not a question. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up since we're past noon here.
Okay.
So thank you everyone for joining our free webinar today. Thank you, Dan. As always, we do record all of our sessions. I know that's a popular question I get every single week. And we do send all registrants a follow-up email, including a link to that recording. You can also find the recording on our website at pragmaticworks.com. I usually post that a little after lunchtime. Thanks again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday for another free training session. Thanks again, Dan.
Thanks, everyone.